You are given certain potential and you are responsible for utilizing it in the best way possible. In this video, you will learn how to reorganize your thinking in order to find your passion and even help your kids and students to do that. Career guidance principles based on psychology science. Let's go. Now, finding your passion is critical because we all have very limited lives and the world is literally waiting for us to go and do something good for it, right? But why is it that so little number of people can actually find themselves in this life, at least professionally? According to one of my mentors who holds PhD in education and is responsible for huge federal level educational projects here in Russia, this happens because we do not follow all the needed psychological principles. So this scholar has formulated 4 key principles for finding your professional passion. And I personally love these 4 principles and I try to use them in whatever educational project that I interact with. So follow me to the end of this video and you will learn these 4 principles. Hey everyone, it's Ilnur. With 15 years of experience in education, I publish videos for those of us who want to grow, especially as educators. So if you're new here, consider subscribing to my channel. So the very first principle is knowing yourself. I know that these may sound too simple, but hold on. If I ask you right now, can you please tell me about yourself? Like, what are your interests? What are your values? What are you motivated by? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Will you able to tell me? Like immediately right now, can you tell me what you are good at? If someone would be able to give you whatever job that you like, what would you ask for? You see, this is the thing, we don't know about ourselves. I mean, I've met people who know about themselves very much. When you ask them, what kind of person are you? They immediately tell you about themselves. I like this, I am interested in these kind of things, this is my learning style. When I do this kind of job, I don't really like it because this part of it doesn't really suit me. And you know, this is amazing. When someone knows about him or herself, they can immediately understand whether something fits them or not because they know themselves. So this is what I'm talking about. But generally what we see here, when I ask this question to people, tell me about yourself, what's your interests and what are you motivated by and what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what your potential is all about, people usually don't know. They literally don't know. So how can you find your passion job if you know nothing about yourself? I mean, yes, so knowing yourself does sound simple. But do we actually do that? So what do you need to do? First of all, you gotta set this goal to gradually learn about yourself. Treat yourself as a very interesting object. Be curious about yourself. Explore yourself, investigate yourself, observe yourself in action. So what else can you do? You can read the literature that makes you reflect about yourself. It's usually some kind of psychological literature. Another good tip is to compare yourself with others. You know, the thing is, it's sometimes difficult to analyze yourself when you're kind of in a vacuum, right? But when you take your own image and when you start comparing yourself with other people, then it's easier to identify your own characteristics, right? Say, I'm comparing myself with the other guy, say with my friend, and I'm like, I think I have more interest in education than this guy. So this is one of the ways of, finding about yourself by comparing yourself with other people. This is really good. Another way is more obvious. You go and have like tests or diagnostics. The internet is full of all this stuff. That's actually one of the reasons why we humans like these things a lot. Lots of people go through all these tests just in order to learn something about ourselves, right? One more thing is to actually ask feedback from people. The thing is, when we are looking to ourselves from inside, it's more difficult sometimes than if someone would be looking at us from outside, right? So sometimes it's just easier to go and ask for some feedback. You can go to your friend, to your mentor, or whatever person you trust a lot and ask for their feedback. Or you can go to your social media and you can create some anonymous poll there or like a Google form for the people to be able to leave their feedback to you there, right? You don't even need to ask for their names and you will learn a lot about yourself. So this principle, knowing yourself, is critical when trying to find your passion. And let's also see the educational aspect of this principle. How can we help our kids and students achieve this principle, knowing themselves? Well, first of all, we have to mention here that kids, teenagers, and even young adults have this profound psychological need of learning about themselves. The thing is, when they grow up, they do not know anything about themselves other than what we actually tell them. So giving feedback is also critical in this case. It may look too simple to us, but when we are working with kids and students, we may see that some kid is doing really well in certain area, like for example someone is organizing something really well, or someone is really good at fast reading and analyzing some texts, or someone is a good leader or good public speaker. So what we need to do here is we actually need to go and tell this student that he or she is good in this certain area. It might be something like, you know what, your singing is really beautiful. Or you know what, the way you organize the class is really professional. You're a natural leader. Or wow, the way you do sports is truly amazing. Or you know what, the essay that you just wrote is really beautiful. You seem to be really good in dancing. Or the way you treat others is really great. Wow, you're very tidy. So kids will like and value these feedback a lot because, as I said previously, they don't really know much about themselves and they get all the information from the outside. So if you give them this feedback, they will like it a lot and they will learn about themselves. Also, you can do the same with them. You can have the tests or diagnostics with them, and then you can actually discuss with them what these tests actually tell about personalities of the kids. And there are lots of different formats of psychological trainings for the kids. It's the moment when you can facilitate these feedback giving to each other from the kids, and this is really something important. But only knowing yourself, of course, is not enough. So we're gonna look at the second principle now. The second principle is learning about the labor market. You see, the thing is, if you don't know the world, the labor market, how can you actually go and find yourself there, right? You don't know anything about it. Well, imagine if you only know like 3 professions, the teacher, the doctor, and the firefighter. If you only know these, so these are the limitations of your world, and you can only choose among these 3 options. So the more you know about these options, the more options you can have. So what are the key professional industries in this beautiful world? Do you know what's going on in your labor market around you, like in your country, in your region, in your city? Do you know about all these things? So I'm in my early 30s, and even though I've been doing a lot of work in educational projects which are dealing with connection of education world and the labor market world, I still keep stumbling across some professional areas that I never heard about. Isn't this amazing? I mean, imagine there might be certain professional areas somewhere there that might be fitting you in the best way possible, but you just don't know about it. Isn't this like painful? So what do you need to do here? How do you learn about labor market? So first of all, as always, set this goal. You need to say yourself, from now on, I will be exploring the labor market to at least understand the general outline of what's going on out there. And there are lots of ways of doing it. You can actually go and read Wikipedia about different industries. Go Google about your country and look what are the key industries in your country and what everyone is doing out there. Then you go dive into these topics and actually analyze them even deeper. Go read about the professions. Well, by the way, the thing about the professions is that the professions nowadays are not something very solid. It's rather a bunch of competencies tied up together and given a certain name. So the teacher nowadays has a completely different skill set than compared to the teacher 20 years ago, right? But the name of it is still the same. So go learn about all these professions, about the nature of professions. It's really interesting and fascinating, and you will be able to actually see what's out there. So in one of my previous videos, I was telling about it in more details. I will put up the card right here. Oh, here. Also, it's important to learn about the trends and tendencies of labor market, and there are lots of articles about it. So the general idea here is do not sit in your small room. Go and learn about what the world has to offer you. But if we don't ask ourselves these questions, of course we're not going to go and Google it. Let's also touch on the educational side of this second principle. How can we actually help our kids and students to learn about the labor market? Well, again, there are lots of ways of doing it. Like these, for example, are the books that I had bought for my daughter. So this is one of the ways of doing it. Like here, for example, there are lots of different great women who have been doing lots of different professions in the world. Like you can see First Lady of Argentina, or a businesswoman, or a peace activist, politician, women's rights activist, social psychologist, neurobiologist, mathematician, rap artist, musician, painter, opera singer, actor, writer and philosopher, architect, engineer, chemist, paleontologist. There are lots of different professions here. So I'm going to be using these kind of books here to discuss all these professions with my daughter as well. I will be showing all these different professions to my daughter in order to illustrate that there are lots of ways of living this life, and there are lots of professional occupations that are out there in the world that she can choose from. Right now it's a bit early for her because she's only 4 years old, and when we tried this book she was like, But later on, in like maybe several months' time, we will start doing all these things. Well, there are also lots of different cartoons and movies and films and lectures about different professional occupations that are out there on YouTube, and you can just go and see them with your kids. You can also ask your students to write essays or do some project work or do some research and come and share with the other students about different industries. Imagine if every week they get certain information about the world. Wouldn't that be great for them? Another very common practice in schools and universities is actually inviting the representatives of different professions to come and give some speech to the students. That's also a good practice. I mean, when a representative of a profession comes and actually tells about his or her profession, that's actually a good illustration of what this profession is all about. But the thing is, this is not enough. Let's go and see the third principle. So principle number 3 is try and probe. Now that you know about yourself and you know about the world, it's time for you two to meet each other, right? You know why this is important? Because your assumptions about the world might be wrong. Because you know what can happen here. You might have read about certain profession and you were like, yeah, this is like something for me, definitely. But if you go and try it actually for maybe 8 hours or maybe a week, you might suddenly realize that, I thought this profession was really great, but now I understand certain aspects that I didn't think about previously, which I don't really like. That's actually why it is critically important to go and actually try different professional tasks. Like, for example, I have a friend who is in his early 20s, but by that time he has already tried like 15 professions already. He was telling me recently he has already tried selling vegetables, being an assistant to the manager, selling iPhone cases, translating some articles from English to Russian, and lots of other things. And you know what? He actually understands how all this labor market works. He knows life. Azat, if you're watching this, I'm telling about you. So Red, a piece of advice. How do you actually go and organize a trial of different professions for yourself? First of all, as always, set yourself a goal. You need to be telling yourself, whatever happens, I need to try different tasks and different professions and different competencies all the time. I mean, whenever there is a chance to try something new, you need to go and do it. So say if you are working somewhere already, there are always some side projects or some offers, some tasks that your boss might be, bringing up and offering to people. Always be the one who takes all these tasks. If they are something that you can try yourself in, like say you've never been writing an article, and if there is such a task in your job environment, be the one who takes this task. You can say, I've never been doing it, but can I take this task? It's also nice to go and work somewhere for free, volunteer work. Because when you usually go somewhere and volunteer or do something for free, there is usually very low bar of expectations. And actually this is the place where you can actually go and try these new things. One of the reasons why people sometimes do not do that is that they are afraid to feel as beginners in these certain new areas. They are like, I have certain expertise in this area, and when I go somewhere else, I feel like I'm the beginner, I feel foolish, and I'm like, I'm not gonna do that. But this is wrong. I mean, go and do it. Just admit that you are a beginner in certain new areas. Just go and try it. You never know what you're gonna get there before you try. And let's go back to the educational side of things as well. How do we, as educators, help our kids or students to try these new professions? How do we organize all these probations? Well, first of all, we need to comprehend this very principle that knowledge only is not enough. This idea is backed up by lots of learning theories, and they all say that we need to go and do something in practice. So you might start with some active formats of education like project work, or doing research, or doing some problem-based learning. Or even better, in some countries there is this concept of dual education. It's when the students spend some of their time studying, but some of the time actually going and working somewhere. It is also important to delegate your own tasks as educator to the students. It's good for you and good for them because you get rid of the tasks that are too boring for you, right? But for the kids, they might be very, very interesting. For example, you are doing something in your classroom, say organizing your classroom. Don't do that yourself. Go ask your students to think about what they might be doing in this classroom, how they would reorganize this classroom. So for them, it might be a really interesting task. And after they reorganize this classroom, you go and give them feedback again. Wow, guys, you know what? This was awesome. The way you reorganized this classroom, the way you put these tables, the way you put these posters on the walls is really beautiful. So you gave them feedback. They learned something about themselves. You gave them some practice and then also give them some information about the labor market. You can say, you know what? In the real world, in the labor market, the thing that you just did here is called interior design. And they're like, wow, I know what interior design is. I have tried it and I know that I like it. So in this way, you are tapping into your students' process of finding their passion in their lives. Isn't it awesome? I should also mention here that these probations, these trials should not be short. I mean, it's better than nothing, but to actually understand whether you do like certain task or not, you need to be doing it not for 5 minutes. Let's get to our last principle of finding your professional passion. Yay, we are on the fourth principle. Are you still with me? So after we have learned something about the world, about ourselves, and after we have been trying ourselves in this world, what we need to do is reflect on all these new experiences. So the fourth principle is to reflect. Think of it as if we had a navigator wired into our brains, which would be helping us to navigate ourselves in this constantly changing world. I mean, this is really important idea. Since the world is rapidly changing, you cannot prepare your students or yourself for the world in a complete way. You cannot just get prepared, right? So the only thing that you can do is to develop a navigator which will be helping you to restructure your path while going this path. So again, all these four principles are developing gradually. So you keep learning something about yourself, you keep learning something about the world, you keep practicing, and the fourth principle is you keep reflecting on what's going on here. So you tried something. Is this something that's really good for you? You tried something new. Is this one really interesting? And then you keep reading the articles. Oh wow, there is a new trend, there is a new tendency in the labor market. And then you keep thinking about yourself, thinking about this labor market, thinking about how you can utilize your potential in these very circumstances. And this is the way that you keep restructuring, rethinking, reconsidering your trajectory. And this is the only way of living in this complex world nowadays. So how do you use these fourth principle, reflection principles in your life? First of all, as always, you need to set this goal. You need to say, it's not enough to just live my life. You always need to sometimes sit and reflect on what's going on in your life, right? So the best solution here is to gradually develop this habit of reflecting on your life. So say you tried something new and then it's time to reflect. Did you like it? What did you like about this new thing? What you didn't like about this thing? What does all this tell about your personality? Would you be able to do this new job for 8 hours per day, every day, for years? Is it something for you, or is it something that you are okay doing like some of your time but not all of your time? Then you try to connect your reflections with your knowledge about the labor market and start asking yourself these questions. What are the jobs out there at the labor market that incorporate all these characteristics that you just liked and which do not include the certain characteristics that you don't like? See how all these three previous principles are connecting here? The thing is, some people already have this habit of, reflecting on something. Some people even do that too much. But if you don't have this habit, it's a really good habit to acquire. Let's also touch on the educational side of this principle, right? So how do you help your kids or your students to acquire this habit? How do you teach them how to reflect? Well, you as a parent or as an educator have to be very determined in this sense. So whenever your kids or your students are having certain experience, it's always good to sit afterwards and to ask them some questions about their previous experience. How did they feel about this new thing? What did they like about it? Would they be able to do that as a job? It doesn't really mean that they will necessarily become this certain profession, but what's more important here is to actually teach them how to reflect on this, because reflection is something that becomes a habit. From my previous work, I have also experienced that it's also nice to actually discuss these 4 principles with the kids or with the students, because they're not stupid. They like and they understand these principles, and if you actually unpack these 4 principles to them, this is something really helpful for them because they become more conscious about all these processes. If you are a manager in educational context, you should also use these 4 principles when, creating these career guidance programs in your school or other educational institution. Say when developing these programs, you should think about how are you going to provide the feedback to your students so that they learn more about themselves. This has to be on the program level to actually ensure that this happens. Also, you have to think about how do you provide these opportunities for your kids or your students to learn about the labor market. You got to invite all these representatives of professions. You have to find all these movies and films about different professions. You have to organize these discussions. How do you do that? You have to plan all these, right? And you have to incorporate the 3rd principle as well, right? You have to bring in these profession trials and probations and volunteer work. And you have to organize this environment for the kids for them to try as many professions as possible. This also doesn't happen itself, right? You have to also properly plan all these things. Then, after having all these events in their career guidance programs, you have to also think about how to ensure that the kids or your students reflect on what they have just experienced, right? To develop this habit of reflection. All these things do not happen by themselves, right? You have to plan all these things very carefully. You have to teach your staff to do that. You have to develop them professionally. Probably the most difficult side of things, at least in schools, is to actually organize all these, profession trials processes, because everyone knows that we do not have too much time in schools for that. This is the problem. But at the end of the day, we have to always remember that if we do not provide these 4 principles in our educational environment, then our kids or students might not find their passion. So we as educators are responsible for these as well. So right now, if you're doing some job that you are not sure you really like, you also can follow these 4 principles. First, try to understand what you are all about. Second, do you actually know something about the labor market? Third, do you actually provide yourself with these opportunities to go and try to find your passion? And fourth, do you actually then reflect on what is going on in your life and how you can incorporate all this knowledge about yourself, about the labor market, and after all these trials, do you actually think about all these things? What I'm talking about here is just the general principle of how all this career guidance happens. So if you want to learn more about these things, check out this playlist right here. I'm putting my development tips there, especially for the educators. Also, if you're interested in these kind of things, and if you want to develop yourself, especially as an educator, then follow the link in the description to this video and leave your email there to stay in touch. And remember, we are given potential that we are responsible for. Have a good day. Bye.